The first flakes were deceptively gentle, a soft, swirling ballet against the bruised purple of the late afternoon sky. Mayor Evelyn Reed watched them from the large, single-pane window of her town hall office, her lips pressed into a thin, unimpressed line. On her desk, a tablet glowed with the grim, multicolored spaghetti models of the National Weather Service. What had been forecast as a significant nor'easter had rapidly mutated into something historic, a meteorological bomb they were now calling the Century Storm. Evelyn was a woman built of straight lines and sharp angles, a crisp black bob that ended precisely at her jawline, a wardrobe of tailored pantsuits in neutral colors, and a mind that operated on a binary code of efficiency and logic. Cedar Hollow was not just her hometown. It was a system, a complex machine of budgets, ordinances, and civic responsibilities that she was tasked with optimizing. This storm was a spanner in the gears, a chaotic variable she had to control. Her phone buzzed, the screen flashing with the name Leo Vance. She sighed, the sound a soft release of exasperation. Picking it up, she didn't bother with a greeting. "Now, I hope you're calling to tell me the Winter Wonderland Festival is officially canceled and you've secured the generators from the county." The voice on the other end was like warm honey, laced with a chuckle that always felt, to Evelyn, slightly irresponsible. "Always straight to business, Evie. I'm calling to see if you've looked outside. It's starting to look a lot like Narnia out there. And it's the Frostfire fate. It has more panache." "Panache doesn't keep people from freezing to death, Leo," she said, her tone dry as dust. "The generators?" "Working on it. Hank at the county garage is being a bit of Scrooge. Said our paperwork was lacking festive spirit. I'm charming him as we speak. I need results, not charm." She glanced back at the radar. The blob of white and red was consuming the state. "I'm issuing a mandatory shelter-in-place order in 30 minutes. The plows are being pulled. It's not safe." "Whoa, pull in the plows. The fate is canceled, Leo." The snap in her voice was rare, a fissure in her composure. "This isn't about your bottom line or your themed cocktails. This is about public safety. My decision is final." There was a pause on the line, the easy charm replaced by a strained quiet. "You know, Evelyn, for some of us, our bottom line is what keeps a roof over our heads. The fate is my biggest weekend of the year. The B&B is fully booked. And I'm responsible for all 2,341 roofs in Cedar Hollow," she countered, her voice softening marginally. She couldn't afford to be his enemy. She needed every business owner on board. "Look, just get to your B&B. Hunker down. I'll be in touch." She ended the call before he could reply, turning her attention to the emergency broadcast script on her screen. Leo Vance, with his artisanal jams and his perpetually untucked flannel shirts, was a force of nature almost as unpredictable as the storm. He saw the town as a living, breathing story, a collection of charming anecdotes. She saw it as a spreadsheet. They had been butting heads since she took office, his free-spirited opposition to her sterile modernization a constant, low-grade irritation. An hour later, the town was officially locked down. Evelyn had sent her small staff home, ordering them to their families. She, however, remained. The town hall, a sturdy, two-story brick building from a more robust century, was the official emergency operations center. It had a backup generator, a landline, and supplies. It was the logical place for her to be. The wind had begun to howl, a rising moan that rattled the window frames. The gentle ballet had become a frenzied, white-out assault. She was reviewing the inventory list, water, blankets, emergency rations, when the main door downstairs crashed open, followed by a blast of Arctic air and the sound of cursing. She hurried out of her office and onto the second-floor landing that overlooked the grand foyer. Below, stamping snow from his boots, was Leo Vance. He was shrouded in a thick, salt and pepper coat of snow, his dark, curly hair plastered to his forehead. In his arms was a large, unwieldy cardboard box. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Evelyn demanded, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Leo looked up, his face flushed from the cold, his usually cheerful eyes wide with adrenaline. Major Rev, fancy meeting you here. I was on my way back to the B&B from the county garage. Success, by the way. The generators are secured, though God knows when we'll see them. And my truck decided it preferred being a snow sculpture to a vehicle. Died right at the end of your driveway. You walked here? In this. It was a quarter-mile from the town gate to the hall, and visibility was near zero. It was either that or become a slightly less charming version of the Iceman, he said, hefting the box. I salvaged the Fates' emergency supplies. Mulling wine spices, a case of brandy, and Mrs. Henderson's fruitcake. I told her it was for the town's emergency stash. A slight fib. Evelyn descended the stairs, her practical flats making no sound on the marble. Leo, you can't stay here. Well, unless you have a magical snow plow hidden in that pantsuit. I'm afraid my options are limited, he replied, setting the box down with a grunt. He looked around the foyer, at the high ceilings and the portraits of stern-faced former mayors. Cozy, a bit austere for my tastes, but it'll do. Before Evelyn could formulate a response that adequately conveyed her frustration, the lights flickered, buzzed, and died, plunging them into an inky, roaring darkness. The hum of the heating system ceased, leaving only the demonic shriek of the wind outside. A moment later, a low, reassuring thrum kicked in. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the foyer in a dim, orange glow. The backup generator had taken over, but it only powered essential circuits, a few lights, the landline, the furnace in the basement. They were trapped. Truly, utterly trapped. The pragmatic mayor and the charming, irresponsible B&B owner. Alone. The silence that followed the generator's kick-in was heavier than the darkness had been. It was filled with the knowledge of their predicament. Evelyn processed it with the speed of a supercomputer. Two people, limited power, finite but sufficient supplies, unknown duration of isolation. Leo processed it by pulling a bottle of brandy from his box. Well, he said, popping the cork with a practiced twist. I think this qualifies as an emergency. He took a swig directly from the bottle and offered it to her. Evelyn stared at the proffered bottle as if it were a venomous snake. No, thank you. And put that away. We need to take stock of the situation rationally. Rationality is my middle name, Leo said, though the glint in his eye suggested otherwise. After indulgence, ignoring him, Evelyn marched to the main doors and pushed. They didn't budge. A solid wall of snow had already sealed them shut. She peered through the small, reinforced glass window into a swirling, impenetrable whiteness. The world had been erased. Okay, she said, turning back, her businesslike tone a shield against the creeping dread. The generator will last for 72 hours at current load. The furnace is gas-powered and on a separate circuit, so we have heat. There's water. We have the emergency rations, and now your contraband. She gestured dismissively at his box. Contraband? Mayor, this is Morel. He pulled out a cloth bag filled with cinnamon sticks and orange peels. We may be facing the apocalypse, but we don't have to face it without a decent mulled wine. Evelyn decided to pick her battles. Arguing with Leo was like arguing with a golden retriever. He was friendly, persistent, and ultimately followed his own whims. Fine, but we establish rules. We need to conserve power. We'll operate primarily out of my office. It's smaller and easier to heat if the furnace fails. We'll take meals at scheduled times. We'll monitor the radio for updates. Leo listened, a faint smile playing on his lips. You've got this all figured out, don't you? The Evelyn Reed special. Disaster with a side of procedure. Procedure keeps people alive, Leo, she said, her voice sharp. She turned and headed for the stairs, expecting him to follow. He did, after grabbing his box of Morel. Her office was indeed more manageable. It housed her large desk, 2 guest chairs, a worn leather sofa, and a bookshelf filled with municipal codes and local history. Leo dumped his box on the sofa and shrugged off his wet coat, hanging it precariously on a corner of a filing cabinet. He looked out of place in her ordered sanctuary, like a vibrant weed growing through a crack in a concrete pavement. So, he began, settling into one of the chairs and propping his feet on her wastebasket. What's the first order of business? Should we draft a subcommittee on blanket distribution? Have a preliminary vote on the brandy ration? Evelyn sat behind her desk, steepling her fingers. The first order of business is to stop being a nuisance. I am still the mayor of this town, and this, she waved a hand around the room, is a temporary extension of my office. You are a civilian under my jurisdiction. Lucky me, he murmured, but he removed his feet from the basket. The hours bled together, marked only by the worsening fury of the storm. Evelyn tried to work, but the landline was dead, the internet was a memory, and the radio spat out nothing but static. Leo, after growing bored of her silent company, explored the building, returning with an armful of old wool blankets from a storage closet and a deck of cards he'd found in a desk drawer. Gin rummy, he offered. I don't play games, she said. Not looking up from a map of the town's water line, she was studying for lack of anything better to do. Of course you don't, he sighed. You know, for a person who's so dedicated to a town full of people, you're remarkably bad at dealing with one. Her head snapped up. Excuse me. You heard me. You're managing me. You're not talking to me. There's a difference. And what would you have us talk about, Leo? The merits of your spice cider versus a coherent emergency plan. How about why you're so angry all the time? He said, his voice losing its teasing edge. How about why you treat any suggestion that isn't born from municipal guideline as a personal insult? The question hung in the air, as stark and unexpected as a crack of thunder. Evelyn was speechless. She wasn't angry. She was focused. She was diligent. His accusation was a misdiagnosis of her character. I'm not angry, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. I am responsible. A concept you seem to have a passing acquaintance with, at best. You run a business on whims and charm. What happens when the charm runs out? Leo, what's left then? He looked at her, a long, steady look that seemed to see past the mayor, past the crisp exterior, to something raw underneath. Sometimes, he said softly, what's left is the real thing. The charm is just the packaging. He didn't wait for a reply. He stood, took a blanket, and walked out of the office, presumably to find another place to sleep. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Evelyn alone with the ghost of his words and the relentless, screaming wind. Evelyn woke on the leather sofa, stiff and disoriented. The dim emergency light cast long, dancing shadows. The storm was still raging, its fury unabated. She checked her watch, 6 a.m. It was impossible to tell if it was night or day. The world was still white noise. She found Leo in the basement by the furnace. He had a toolbox open and was fiddling with a valve. What are you doing? She asked, her voice laced with alarm. Don't touch that. Relax, Evie. I'm not an idiot. The pilot light keeps flickering. The flame is yellow. It's not getting enough air. Probably a vent outside getting clogged with snow. He tapped the gauge. If this goes out, we're popsicles in about 3 hours. The use of her childhood nickname, one nobody had used in 20 years, threw her more than the potential of freezing to death. She watched him work, his hands capable and sure. He wasn't just charming. He was practical in a way she hadn't credited. He knew how things worked. Can you fix it? She asked, her voice softer. I can jury-rig it. Keep it going for a while. He adjusted a screw, and the flame burned a healthier blue. There, that should hold. For now. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at her. In the low light of the basement, the lines of their usual animosity seemed blurred. They were just two people in a cellar trying to keep a flame alive. Thank you, she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. He nodded. You're welcome. They retreated to the small kitchenette on the first floor to make a bleak breakfast of protein bars and instant coffee, made with water heated on the gas stove. The silence between them was no longer purely hostile, but contemplative. I'm not irresponsible, you know, Leo said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Not with the things that matter. The B and B, it was my grandmother's. I grew up in that house. When she passed, everyone expected me to sell it, go back to my life in the city. But I couldn't. He stared into his mug. It's not just a business. It's a piece of this town's heart. The fate, it was her idea. I'm just trying to keep it all alive. For her. For the town. Evelyn listened, truly listened. She had always seen his events as frivolous, his business as a hobby. She'd never considered the history, the love woven into it. My father was mayor, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. It was a part of her history she never discussed. For 20 years, he loved this town, but he loved the idea of it more than the people. He was always planning for some glorious future, while the present was crumbling. The potholes, the leaky roof on the community center, he saw them as trivial. Beneath him, she took a shaky breath. I watched him make grand speeches while people's basements flooded. I saw the disappointment in their eyes. I promised myself I would never be that kind of leader. I would fix the potholes. I would read the boring reports. I would be pragmatic, because someone has to do the work that no one sees, the work that actually keeps the lights on. Leo was watching her, his expression unreadable. So you became the anti-him. All substance, no style. Style is a luxury, she countered, but the heat was gone from the argument. Is it, he asked, or is it the thing that makes the substance worth having? What's the point of having the best-maintained roads in the state if nobody ever stops to enjoy the view from them? Their philosophical debate was interrupted by a loud crack, followed by a shuddering groan that reverberated through the entire building. They both froze. What was that? Evelyn whispered. They rushed to the front foyer. A massive limb from the ancient oak tree beside the building had sheared off under the weight of the snow and crashed through part of the portico. Snow and splintered wood littered the marble floor. But worse, the limb had taken out a section of the wall, and a vicious, freezing wind was now whipping into the hall. Their sanctuary had been breached. The temperature in the foyer was already plummeting. The generator, Evelyn said, her mind racing. The main fuel line runs along that wall. Without a word, they both sprinted for the basement door. The scene that greeted them was worse than they feared. The falling limb had ruptured the pipe where it entered the building. Diesel fuel was spraying in a fine, toxic mist, and the generator was sputtering, its rhythm faltering. Shut it off, Leo yelled over the noise. Evelyn found the main switch and threw it. The generator coughed and died. The emergency lights flickered, dimmed, and then went out, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only sound was the hungry roar of the wind from above and the steady, sickening drip of spilling fuel. They were now in the dark, the cold creeping in, with a toxic spill and no power. This was the turning point, the moment the carefully constructed rules of Evelyn's world shattered completely. Panic was a cold, sharp claw in Evelyn's throat. It was worse than the physical cold. It was the panic of failure. She had one job: keep things running, maintain control. And she had failed, utterly. In the pitch black, she heard Leo's voice, calm and steady. Okay, don't move. I have a lighter. A flick, a spark, and then a small, wavering flame illuminated his face. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not accusation, but grim determination. First things first, he said, his voice a command. We need to seal that breach upstairs and find another light source. The fumes down here are bad. He was taking charge, and for the first time in her adult life, Evelyn Reed was relieved to let someone else lead. She followed him back up the stairs, her hand on his shoulder to keep from stumbling in the dark. In her office, by the lighter's flame, they found a heavy-duty flashlight in her bottom drawer. Its beam was a solid, reassuring bar of light in the oppressive darkness. They dragged a large, heavy tapestry from a meeting room and, using a staple gun for maintenance, managed to cover the worst of the hole in the foyer wall. It was a temporary, desperate fix, but it blunted the knife edge of the wind. Back in the office, the reality of their situation set in. No power, a dying furnace, and a finite amount of time before the cold became lethal. The gas stove still works, Leo said, thinking aloud. So we can heat water, cook a little. We'll move the mattresses from the sick room in here. Conserve body heat. Body heat, Evelyn repeated, her voice small. It's Survival 101, Mayor. Not a proposition. He was already in motion, a whirlwind of practical energy. He was no longer the frivolous B&B owner. He was a man built for a crisis, his charm replaced by a rugged competence. They worked in silence for an hour, creating a makeshift camp in her office. They dragged in 2 narrow cots and pushed them together, piling them with every blanket they could find. Leo found a camping stove and several cans of soup in the emergency locker. He heated a can of chicken noodle soup on the gas range, and they ate it huddled in blankets, the flashlight standing upright between them like a campfire. The cold was a living entity pressing in on them, their breath plumed in the beam of the flashlight. I was wrong, Evelyn said quietly, the words misting in the air. Leo looked up from his soup. About what? About you. I thought you were just charm. I see now that I was wrong. He gave a half smile. And I was wrong about you. I thought you were just procedure. But you're not angry. You're scared. The observation was so accurate it felt like a physical blow. She didn't deny it. She just nodded, staring into the synthetic light. I'm scared of failing them, she whispered. The town. My father. He failed them in small, quiet ways. I'm terrified of failing them in a big, loud one. You haven't failed, Leo said. You're here. You stayed. That counts for something. He paused. My grandmother used to say that a town isn't its roads or its buildings. It's the stories told over fences and the hands that help in a storm. You can't spreadsheet that, Evelyn, but you can feel it. He reached into his box and pulled out the bottle of brandy. This time, when he offered it, she took it. The liquid was fire in her throat, warming her from the inside out. She passed it back, and their fingers brushed in the dark. A simple, human contact that felt more profound than any handshake. They talked then, not as Mayor Nuisance, but as Evelyn and Leo. She told him about the crushing weight of expectation, the loneliness of authority. He told her about the fear of losing his grandmother's legacy, the struggle to be taken seriously. They were 2 sides of the same coin, both desperately trying to preserve a town they loved in their own, diametrically opposed ways. Exhaustion eventually claimed them. They lay on the pushed-together cots, back to back, a mountain of blankets over them. The wind still screamed, the cold still gnawed, but huddled together, sharing their warmth, they found a fragile, human defense against the abyss. Evelyn felt the solid, reassuring warmth of his back against hers, and for the first time since the storm began, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the hope of a plan, but the hope of connection. The world was still. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed when she woke. The demonic shrieking of the wind had ceased, replaced by an eerie, profound silence. Weak, gray light filtered through the snow-caked window. The storm was over. She was still curled against Leo's back, his warmth a haven she was reluctant to leave. She carefully extricated herself, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. She shone the flashlight on her watch. It was 9 a.m. They had survived the night. Leo stirred, rolling over. His hair was a riot of curls, his face softened by sleep. He blinked up at her. Is it over? I think so, she said, her voice hushed by the quiet. They went to the window. The sight that greeted them was both breathtaking and terrifying. Cedar Hollow was buried. Drifts climbed past the first-floor windows of nearby buildings. Cars were mere lumps under a smooth, white blanket. The trees were skeletal, ice-laden sculptures. The world had been remade in monochrome. But the sky was a clear, hard blue. The sun, weak and winter-pale, glinted off a billion ice crystals. It was a landscape of sublime, silent beauty. My God, Leo breathed. Their immediate problem, however, remained. No power, a breached building, and they were still trapped. The silence was broken by a distant, mechanical sound. A low, grinding rumble. A snowplow. Hope surged through Evelyn like an electric current. She scrambled for the landline phone on her desk. It was still dead, but her personal cell phone, which had been a useless brick for 2 days, now showed a single, wavering bar of signal. "Now, I have a signal." She immediately called the public works director. The line crackled, but it connected. "Bill, it's Evelyn. We're at the town hall. We're okay. The building is damaged, but we're okay." The voice on the other end was frantic with relief. "Mayor, thank God. We've been trying to reach you. The whole town is buried. We're starting with the main roads now. We'll get to you as soon as we can, maybe by this afternoon." She relayed the information to Leo, who slumped against the wall in relief. The ordeal was almost over. With the imminent prospect of rescue, the strange, intimate bubble they had inhabited began to dissolve. The real world, with its titles and conflicts and responsibilities, was reasserting itself. They spent the next few hours in a practical, slightly awkward silence, tidying their makeshift camp, waiting for the sound of the plow to grow closer. It was early afternoon when they heard the heavy engine and the scrape of steel on asphalt right outside. They rushed to the foyer, pulling aside the tapestry to look out. A massive county plow, followed by a sheriff's SUV, was clearing the driveway. An hour later, with the help of the crew, they had shoveled a path to the doors and managed to get one open. Evelyn stepped out into the blinding, pristine world. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but the sun on her face felt like a miracle. The public works director, Bill, wrapped her in a thick coat. "Mayor Reed, we were so worried. The whole town lost power. Still out in most places. But we've got the emergency generators from the county. Leo, your nagging finally paid off." Leo, who had emerged behind her, grinned. "Told you my charm had its uses." People were milling about, assessing the damage to the portico. The spell was broken. Evelyn was the mayor again. Leo was the B&B owner. He turned to her, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Well, I guess I should try to dig out my truck. See what's left of the B&B." "Leo," she said, stopping him. The crowd was busy. No one was listening. "Thank you. I wouldn't have. I couldn't have." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, you would have. You're the most capable person I know. But you're welcome. For the company." He turned and trudged through the snow towards his buried truck. The following week was a blur of relentless activity. Cedar Hollow began the long, slow process of digging out. The power was restored in stages. Evelyn worked 18-hour days, coordinating relief efforts, assessing damage, and navigating the labyrinth of state and federal aid applications. She was back in her element, a commander on the battlefield of recovery. But something had shifted in her. She found herself listening more, not just to the problems, but to the people describing them. When Mrs. Gable from the library worried that the children's reading nook was too dark without power, Evelyn didn't just promise to fix the wiring. She had Leo's generators, which he had immediately donated to the town, set up to power a string of fairy lights around it, creating a magic cave for the kids. When the council debated the budget for repairing the town square, Evelyn didn't just argue for the most cost-effective pavers. She proposed a new community space, with room for a stage for future events. "A town needs a heart," she'd said, surprising herself and the council. Not just arteries. She hadn't seen Leo much. He was busy himself, repairing burst pipes at the B&B and dealing with his canceled bookings. Their paths crossed in meetings, but they were always surrounded by people, the professional distance between them firmly back in place. Yet, she found herself missing their conversations, missing the way he challenged her, missing the warmth of his back against hers in the freezing dark. One evening, a week after the thaw began, she stood in her now-repaired office, looking out at the town. The snow was dirty and piled high, but the streets were clear. Life was returning. Her eyes fell on a flyer for the long-canceled Frostfire Fete, left on a side table. Without overthinking it, she put on her coat and walked out of the town hall. She didn't take her car. She walked through the crisp evening air, down the main street, to the large Victorian house on the corner that was the Cedar Hollow bed and breakfast. The lights were on, glowing warmly. She could see Leo inside, moving around the dining room, setting tables. He was preparing for a future that hadn't arrived yet, but he had faith that it would. She pushed the door open, a small bell jingling overhead. Leo looked up from a table setting. He seemed surprised, then a slow smile spread across his face. Mayor Reed, to what do I owe the pleasure? Coming to inspect my fire code compliance. No, she said, walking into the cozy, fragrant room. It smelled of lemon polish and baking bread. It felt like a home. I came to talk. About the town. Ah, business, he said, his smile faltering just a fraction. No, Evelyn said, her voice firm but gentle. Not business. She took a breath, stepping closer. I was thinking about what you said, about stories and hands that help. And I was thinking that a town needs both. It needs someone to fix the potholes and someone to plan the party. I think we make a pretty good team. Leo watched her, his expression unreadable. Is that so? I've already spoken to the council, she continued. We're going to have a spring thaw festival to help the local businesses recover. And I can't think of anyone better to organize it than you. If you're willing. He was silent for a long moment, just looking at her. Then he walked around the table until he was standing right in front of her. I'm willing. On one condition. What's that? That you call me Leo, and that you let me take you to dinner. A real dinner, not a town hall meeting. Evelyn felt a genuine, uncalculated smile break across her face for the first time in years. It felt strange and wonderful. I think that can be arranged, Leo. He reached out, not for a handshake, but to take her hand. His grip was warm and sure. Good, because I have a feeling our story is just getting started. Outside, the long winter was finally beginning to loosen its grip. But inside the warm B&B, surrounded by the promise of spring and a newfound understanding, Evelyn Reed felt her own personal thaw finally, joyfully begin.